The case featured in this episode has been researched using police records, court documents, witness statements, and the news. Listener discretion is advised. All parties mentioned are innocent until proven guilty, and all opinions are my own. Hey everyone, my name is Nikki Young, and this is Serial Napper, the true crime podcast for naps. I'm back with another true crime story to lull you to sleep, or perhaps to give you nightmares. Tonight's case is one that rattled a small seaside town in Ireland and left the entire country asking, how can someone vanish without a trace in their own home? The last time anyone outside of her household saw Tina Satchwell alive was on March 19, 2017. She and her husband Richard were browsing through bargains at a local car boot sale. By all accounts, it was just a regular Sunday. No drama, no suspicious behavior, nothing that would suggest that just one day later, Tina would be gone. According to Richard, Tina asked him to make a trip to Aldi the following morning, March 20th. He left their home in Youghal around 10 a.m., grabbed a few things from the store, and got back at around 2 p.m. But when he walked through the door, Tina wasn't there. Her keys were on the floor, her phone was on the table, her beloved dogs were still inside the house alone. But she was gone. It wasn't until 4 days later that Richard contacted Tina's family and then the Gardaí, the police, to report her missing. He claimed that she'd taken off with 2 suitcases, a stash of cash totaling around €26,000, and seemingly no plan to come back. That's when the mystery deepened. Despite extensive investigations, forensic searches, and even international tips, every lead led to a dead end. Tina Satchwell had vanished, and no one could figure out how or why. But just when everyone began to believe that this case might remain unsolved forever, a shocking discovery turned everything upside down. So, dim the lights, put your phone down, and listen as I unravel the baffling and ultimately heartbreaking story of Tina Satchwell and the twist that no one saw coming. This month, for the month of June, I'm featuring cases recommended by my listeners. And this one comes from Lucy. So, let's jump right in. Before Tina Satchwell became the name on a missing persons poster and breaking news headlines, she was simply Tina, a vibrant, glamorous, kind-hearted woman with a complicated past and a love for the simple things: fashion, animals, and family, even if that family story wasn't always what it seemed. Tina was originally from St. Bernard's Place in Fermoy, County Cork, but in the 1980s, she moved to Colville in England to live with a woman that she believed was her mother, her grandmother, Florence. It wasn't until Tina was preparing for her confirmation and needed her birth certificate that she made a life-altering discovery. Florence wasn't her mother. Her biological mother was actually Mary Collins, a woman Tina had always believed was her sister. And if that wasn't enough, she learned that her half-sister, Sarah Howard, someone that she thought was her niece, was actually just that, her half-sister. Understandably, the discovery rocked Tina. She felt like she had been lied to for years, and it left behind wounds that would never fully heal. Her relationship with Sarah changed after that. Sometimes they were close, like real sisters should be, but other times they wouldn't speak for years. According to Sarah, by the time of Tina's disappearance, they hadn't spoken in over 15 years. Their relationship had become as fractured and complicated as the truth Tina had uncovered as a young girl. It was while she was in Colville at just 17 years old that Tina met 21-year-old Richard Satchwell, the man who would later become her husband. Richard claimed that it was love at first sight. He told his brother right away that he was going to marry her. Just 2 years later, in October 1989, he proposed to her at a place called Mount Pleasant. The following year, on Tina's 20th birthday, they were married in Oldham. But the wedding was missing something, or rather, someone. Richard's entire family. None of them came. They didn't approve of the relationship, though the reasons were never really made entirely clear. Over the years, Tina and Richard lived in various homes throughout County Cork, before settling in Fermoy for a while. Then in 2016, they made what would be their final move to a quiet house in Youghal, about 40 kilometers from where Tina had grown up. But this new start wasn't exactly a happy one. Tina was reportedly broken-hearted to leave Fermoy behind. Her world in Youghal grew smaller, more isolated. Her sister Lorraine would later say that it felt like Tina was being cut off from everyone, as if Richard was slowly pulling her into a world where it was just the two of them. Few people could say much about their marriage. They didn't really socialize, and they didn't really have any friends in town. Even Tina's half-sister Sarah was hesitant when asked about their relationship. All she could really say was it was odd. Richard, on the other hand, referred to Tina as his trophy wife. But Tina was much more than that. To those who did get to know her, even if just for a little while, she left a lasting impression. Angela Sheehan, an acquaintance from Youghal, remembered Tina as petite, weighing around 8 stones, always dressed up, always glamorous. She loved her heels, her hair, her makeup, and her jewelry. Whenever they'd run into each other, it was all that they would talk about. Fashion, laughs, light-hearted moments. Angela called her a lovely girl, someone who was bubbly, pleasant, and fun to be around. Tina also had a deep love for animals, especially her dogs Heidi and Ruby, and she was rarely ever seen without them. Ruby, a Chihuahua, was her baby. The couple had bought her in 2014, 2 years after the sudden death of Tina's beloved brother Tom, a tragedy that shook her to her core. Tina and Tom were incredibly close, and his passing left her heartbroken. Her husband Richard said, "Ruby brought Tina comfort during that time, something small and sweet to love. Heidi, the other dog, was supposedly his, but Ruby was Tina's child in every way that mattered." She also shared her home with a pet parrot named Valentine. Tina loved animals fiercely. That's why the idea that she'd just walk out, leaving Heidi and Ruby behind, it immediately raised red flags for those who knew her. She wouldn't have just left them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the day that Tina Satchwell disappeared, the day that everything changed. It was Sunday, March 19th, 2017, when Tina was last seen alive by someone outside of her home. She and Richard had spent the morning at a car boot sale about 35 kilometers away from their home on Grattan Street in Youghal. It was something that they did often. Tina loved car boot sales, not just for the bargain hunting, but for the bit of socializing they allowed. She bought a black jacket and a dress that day, and when she got home, she hung them up neatly over a door in the living room, as if she were looking forward to wearing them. People who saw her and Richard that morning said that there was nothing unusual about them. There didn't seem to be any tension, no visible signs of anything being off. Just a normal Sunday day out, as normal of a day as any other. One man, John Keown, who knew Tina from the car boot scene, remembered her fondly. She bought what he called a, quote, beautiful jacket and expensive perfume that day. And he even joked with her, teasing, "You must be meeting a man tonight." Tina smiled and replied, "I have one man only." She told him she loved her husband, that she would never touch another man. And that was the last time anyone outside of their home saw her alive. The next morning, Monday, March 20th, Richard Satchwell said things started off completely normal. According to him, he gave Tina breakfast around 10 a.m., and then he left for Aldi. It was going to be about an hour's round trip. He was off to pick up some groceries. He claimed that the trip was at Tina's request. He returned around 2 p.m., but when he walked back into their home, Tina was gone. He told Gardaí that her keys were lying on the floor, her mobile phone was sitting on the living room table, and perhaps most shockingly, her 2 beloved dogs, Heidi and Ruby, were still inside, completely alone. Tina never went anywhere without them, not even to the shops. Also missing, according to Richard, were 2 suitcases and a substantial amount of cash, around €26,000, which he said was kept in a cash box and had come from the sale of their previous home in Fermoy. But here's the part that left everyone scratching their heads. Richard didn't call the Gardaí that day, or the next, or even the next. It wasn't until 4 days later, during a trip to Fermoy for a medical appointment, that he contacted Tina's family to ask if they had seen her. When they said no, he finally walked into the Fermoy Garda station and officially reported her as missing. Richard told investigators that he hadn't been worried at first. He said he thought Tina had gone to Fermoy on her own, despite the fact that she didn't drive, she didn't work, and she relied on him for transportation. He said he assumed she just needed a few days to get her head straight. But for everyone who knew Tina, that story didn't sit right. She wouldn't just leave her dogs. She wouldn't just vanish without telling anyone. And $26,000 in cash? 2 suitcases? Well, it didn't make any sense. And it didn't take long for Gardaí to launch a full-scale missing persons investigation. Search efforts began right away, and still no sign of Tina. From the outside, it seemed like she had simply evaporated, but investigators were already beginning to suspect that something wasn't exactly right inside that house on Grattan Street. The search for Tina Satchwell was, from the very beginning, a maze of confusion, unanswered questions, and eerie contradictions. Just a few months after she was last seen, on June 7, 2017, Gardaí conducted their first full search of the Satchwell home, which in my opinion seems a little too late if you're really looking at all possibilities. I mean, what if she was abducted from her home? What if that's why all of her things, including her keys and phone, were found left scattered behind? Up to 10 officers combed through the house for 12 hours, top to bottom. What they found was a far cry from the glamorous, fashion-loving Tina people remembered. The home was described as filthy and unkept. Dog feces on the floor, a dirty bird cage that hadn't been cleaned in ages. Not what you'd expect from a woman known for her pristine appearance and eye for beauty. Upstairs, hundreds of outfits hung on clothing racks, some still in plastic, apparently unworn. Forensic scientist Dr. Edward Connolly with Forensic Science Ireland was brought in. Using luminol, a chemical that detects the presence of blood even if it has been cleaned or washed away, he examined the house thoroughly, including stairwells and common areas. But despite the intensive sweep, no traces of blood were found. Nothing suspicious, nothing conclusive. Investigators scoured CCTV footage from the area, but there was no sighting of Tina anywhere. Not in Youghal, not at any known public transport hubs, ports, or airports. Her mobile phone had been left behind. Her bank accounts showed no activity. And her social welfare status, it remained untouched. Wherever Tina had gone, if she had gone at all, she had left no digital trail behind. Gardaí followed up on numerous potential sightings all across Ireland, the UK, and even further. But every single lead, it came up cold. Then on July 2017, the case took another odd turn. Richard Satchwell reported seeing 2 suitcases, similar to the ones that Tina allegedly left with, inside a recycling bin at a Tesco car park near their home. This prompted another forensic investigation. But by January of the following year, Gardaí ruled out any link between the suitcases and Tina's disappearance. Still, the public was captivated. A few weeks after Tina vanished, Richard made a public plea on Crime Call, appearing heartbroken and desperate, saying, "Tina, come home. There's nobody mad at you. My arms are open. The pets are missing you. I just can't go on not knowing." He told the hosts of Crime Call that he'd been prescribed antidepressants in the weeks after she went missing, but he had chosen not to take them because he'd started a new job as a truck driver. On the program, he claimed Tina had once told him not to follow her if she ever went away. And the missing suitcases, he said, this reinforced his belief that she had left of her own volition. But Tina's family didn't buy it. Her Aunt Margaret also appeared on Crime Call, insisting that it would be completely out of character for Tina to vanish without a word. She said, quote, "She wasn't a person who would do that. She didn't go very far on her own all of her life. And if she did go away, it would be to a family member, someone where she felt safe, and nobody in the family has heard a word." By August 19th, the Garda Water Unit, Irish Coast Guard, and Army launched search operations around Youghal, focusing especially on the harbor at low tide. But still, there was no trace. On November 30th, on what would have been the couple's 26th wedding anniversary, Richard made another tearful plea. In media interviews, he begged Tina to come home. Tears streamed down his face as he insisted that he couldn't go on without her. As the first Christmas without her approached, Richard claimed that there would be no celebrating in their home. He said Tina had been struggling with undiagnosed depression, but that they had both agreed she would never take medication for it. Despite offering no solid leads or updates, Richard continued to speak to the media, sometimes with new theories. He suggested that Tina may have been helped by a third party, someone who staged her disappearance and then whisked her away, possibly to family in the UK where she had relatives. He said, quote, "I believe she's in the UK where she has quite a large family. I actually have money put away for when she returns so we can head off together for a few weeks' break." But while Richard seemed to cling to the belief that Tina had just walked away, Garda weren't so sure. Behind the scenes, suspicion continued to build, because despite all the media appearances, all the tears, all the theories, the facts remained the same. No trace of Tina, no goodbye, no confirmed sightings, and a house that, for all of its chaos, seemed a little too quiet. As the months passed, Tina Satchwell's name slowly started to fade from the headlines, but for her family and those who knew her, the pain of not knowing, it never let up. While her husband Richard kept speaking out in interviews, many of Tina's relatives in Fermoy, they chose to stay quiet, just too heartbroken to talk publicly. But they did have something to say on a Facebook page that they set up in her name. They made it clear that they didn't believe the story that Richard was telling. They wrote, quote, "Tina's husband believes she's in the UK with family. We have 2 family members in England, and she's had no contact with either of them. We've checked with everyone we know, and Garda have spoken to them too. We just wanted to clear that up." And they weren't wrong, really. Garda confirmed that they had gone through CCTV from airports and ferry ports in Ireland and the UK, hoping to spot Tina. But there was nothing. There was no sign she had ever left the country, and her passport was still at home. So if she didn't leave, where did she go? In March 2018, there was finally a glimmer of hope. Garda launched a full-scale search of Mitchell's Wood, a heavily forested area. Someone had called in with what they described as reliable and credible information. The caller said that they had seen a blonde woman who looked like Tina entering the woods with another person sometime the previous year. But here's the unsettling part. They said they never saw her come back out. Investigators found fragments of clothing, which were sent off for forensic testing. Everyone held their breath, but once again, it came back not Tina's. There was no trace of Tina in that forested area. That same month, Richard Satchwell went on The Ray Darcy Show. He told viewers that he still believed his wife would return, and he said that he had even spoken to a man who was 100% sure he had met her. He also admitted something that he hadn't before, that waiting 4 days to report her missing had been a mistake. He kept saying he had nothing to do with Tina's disappearance. He even publicly offered to take a lie detector test to prove it. But when a show offered to actually arrange one, Richard backed out, saying he'd do it when the time feels right. Unlike Tina's family, Richard never really stepped back from the media. He constantly gave interviews and made appeals. He even floated theories of his own. And over the next year or two, Richard changed jobs, moving from local work to becoming a courier. But he said he still bought birthday and Christmas presents for Tina. It's better than giving up, he said. But for Gardai, things weren't looking promising. In the 20 months since Tina vanished, there had been zero activity in her bank accounts, and like I said, her phone hadn't been used, her passport hadn't been touched. Every lead ended in a dead end. And then came another hopeful moment. In January 2021, female skeletal remains were found near a railway line in Middleton. Gardai quickly sent them off for analysis. Could it finally be Tina? The answer was a crushing no. The remains belonged to another woman entirely. At this point, everyone, Gardai, her family, even the public, was growing increasingly frustrated. How could a woman with no car, no passport, no history of running away just vanish into thin air? In an age of CCTV, phone tracking, and digital footprints, it just didn't make any sense. And perhaps most troubling of all, if Tina was the victim of foul play, that would mean someone out there knew exactly what had happened to her and had gotten away with it. The case began to grow cold, and the police, as well as Tina's family, grew frustrated with the lack of evidence and results. For years, it seemed like Tina Satchwell had just vanished without a trace, and despite the many searches, interviews, and tips, nothing seemed to bring investigators closer to the truth. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Multiple sources say that if it weren't for one man, Detective Garda David Keller, this case, it might still be sitting on a shelf collecting dust. According to those who know him, it was his tenacity and what some would call his sheer bloody-mindedness that finally cracked the case. At a time when other cases were being prioritized and some senior Gardai believed resources should be focused on investigations that were still, quote, solvable, Keller was directed, basically assigned, to re-examine the Satchwell file by his superior, and instead of letting it slip through the cracks, Keller got to work. He set up shop in a quiet Garda station in East Cork, turning a small office into his own incident room. Then he started going through the case, statement by statement, photo by photo, timeline by timeline. He pored over every scrap of evidence, every contradictory word, every moment that Richard Satchwell had shared with Gardai. As he dug in, he began to spot some things. Small errors, missed leads, details that hadn't been followed up. Bit by bit, a new strategy started to form. According to testimony given in court, the file took months to properly re-examine, but it was worth it. The case file included everything, from witness statements, CCTV, the original 2017 search of Tina's home, passport and welfare checks, media appeals, even reported sightings. And somewhere in all of that, Keller found the breadcrumbs. Phone data. That was one of the big ones. The original investigators had gathered it, but no one had realized just how crucial it was. Keller did. That phone traffic, when cross-referenced with CCTV footage, painted a whole new picture. Footage placed Richard Satchwell at Youghal Post Office and Aldi on March 20th, 2017, the day Tina was last seen. He had previously said that he wasn't even in County Cork that morning. The phone data proved otherwise. There were other red flags too. An examination of a laptop turned up disturbing internet searches just days after Tina disappeared. Things like how quicklime reacts with water. The original team had logged it, but for some reason, they hadn't pursued it. Then there was the money. Richard had always claimed that Tina left with €26,000, but an accountant who examined their finances, they found no sign of it. No withdrawals, no hidden cash. It didn't add up. As Gardai started re-interviewing people, something else strange came to light. Comparing old and new photos of the house on Grattan Street, they noticed a newly built brick wall underneath the staircase, one that hadn't been there in 2017. When the police asked Satchwell about it, he claimed a builder had come in to do the work. But when they tracked down that builder, he said he had never set foot in the house. That was a lie. and it was a big one. By February 2022, the police were confident Tina Satchwell hadn't just disappeared. She'd been murdered. The evidence pointed overwhelmingly towards unlawful killing, and the person at the center of it all was Richard Satchwell, her husband. By August 2022, the case against him was nearly ready. Gardaí had formed what they call a reasonable belief that Richard Satchwell was responsible, but they didn't want to rush it. They wanted the final piece, physical evidence. So they got a warrant to do something that they hadn't done in all of these years. Dig. Garda forensic experts were brought down from Dublin along with specialist construction workers and digging equipment. They returned to the house on Grattan Street, the place where Tina had lived and the last place she was ever seen. Inside, under the staircase, they found exactly what they were expecting and dreading: a section of poorly poured concrete and brickwork that didn't match the rest of the house. A makeshift tomb, and wrapped in plastic beneath it was the body of Tina Satchwell. The truth had finally been uncovered. When Tina Satchwell's remains were finally examined, more than 6 years after she vanished, what was found was haunting. Despite the passage of time, some parts of her body had been preserved. Her fingernails were still painted pink. Her skull had separated from her body due to decomposition, but strands of hair still clung to it, strands that would be used to identify her body. As for her body, it was wrapped in a pale lilac St. Bernard's dressing gown. The gown was heavily soiled and torn, with bones pushing through the fabric. Some soft tissue remained, according to the assistant state pathologist. Tina's Tweety Pie tattoo was still faintly visible on her chest, and a small barbell piercing was found in her belly button. She had been wearing pajamas that bore the words, "Some bunny loves me." In the left pocket of her dressing gown, investigators discovered a gold Playboy-branded purse. Inside were the tiny details of a life once lived: her public service card, membership, and loyalty cards from all of her favorite stores. All of it deeply personal. All of it left buried with her for years. And with that, Gardaí moved in. Richard Satchwell was arrested on suspicion of murder and brought to a station in Cork for questioning. In the interview room, detectives laid out all of the evidence that they had gathered. But Satchwell wasn't talking. He wasn't cooperating. Still, the silence said enough. They had their suspect, and finally, they had Tina. After years of unanswered questions, the arrest of Richard Satchwell felt like the beginning of closure. But the road to justice, it wasn't straightforward. When he was first taken in, Richard stuck to his guns. He claimed that he was innocent. But as the evidence piled up, the cracks in his story widened. Eventually, he changed his tune. In his new version of events, Richard claimed that Tina had attacked him during an argument, allegedly with a chisel. He said he acted in self-defense. According to him, on the morning of March 20th, 2017, it started out like any other. He said he was making Tina a special breakfast, fruit, yogurt, her usual tea, and toast, when he heard a strange scraping sound coming from near the staircase. Curious, he followed the noise, and he claimed he found Tina there, chisel in hand, scratching away at the plasterboard that he'd just put up. He said he asked her, "Tina, what are you doing?" And that's when things turned violent. According to his account, she suddenly lunged at him with the chisel. He said she knocked him to the floor and climbed on top of him, trying to stab him in the head. Now, keep in mind, Tina was a petite woman, standing about 5'4", maybe 5'5". He, on the other hand, was a large man, around 6'2", broad and strong. Yet, despite the obvious difference in size and strength, he couldn't explain why he wasn't able to defend himself or to disarm her. Not convincingly, anyway. So he says Tina straddled him and tried to stab him, and in a panic, he grabbed the belt from her dressing gown and pressed it against her neck, claiming she went limp during the struggle. Then, in a disturbingly tender kind of twist, he said he cut the belt from around her neck so that he could hold her in his arms for the rest of the night. But Gardai weren't buying it, and they had the receipts. That robe belt that he claims to have strangled her with, it hadn't been cut off at all. In fact, it was still tied tightly around Tina's body, and not in any way that suggested a panicked struggle. He claimed that after her death, he tried to give Tina a sort of makeshift burial, one that he described as tender and loving. He said he placed bunches of tulips with her, along with her wedding ring, which he told Gardai he had carefully tucked into the pocket of her dressing gown. But when investigators checked, there was no ring to be found. He called her his, quote, beautiful Irish rose, and said he even searched the local supermarkets for actual roses to lay with her body, but none were available, so tulips had to do. He said he wrapped her in black plastic, not to hide her, he insisted, but to keep the dirt off of her. Then, he said, he gently lifted her into the grave himself. Richard Satchwell eventually admitted that he stored Tina's body in a large chest freezer, yes, an actual freezer, for a time after her death. And not just anywhere, he kept her there in the freezer in the house. Then later, he buried her in that concrete tomb under the stairs. As for the freezer, well, he sold it online on Done Deal. And no, it's never been recovered. Somewhere in Ireland, there could be a family using it right now to store Sunday roasts and frozen pizzas, completely unaware of its horrifying past. And there were more disturbing discoveries too. Gardai began to suspect that the attack on Tina happened in the bathroom, specifically involving the glass shower doors. After she went missing, Richard Satchwell made a bunch of suspicious home renovations. He removed the standalone shower and he replaced it with a storage press. He also swapped out the bathtub for a secondhand jacuzzi, something that no one could really explain. These changes raised red flags, especially after fragments of glass were found embedded in Tina's scalp and torso. Investigators believed that she may have been shoved into or through the shower doors, or that the bathtub had something to do with her final moments. They also found smashed glass in a door near the stairs, but when confronted, Richard Satchwell claimed that it had always been that way since they bought the house. Of course, no one really believed him. In April 2025, the case went to trial at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. For the first time, Tina's story and Richard Satchwell's lies, they were laid out in full for a jury. Richard Satchwell clung to his version of events. He said it was all just an accident, a fight gone wrong, that he never really meant to hurt her. He leaned heavily on the fact that assistant state pathologist couldn't determine an official cause of death. Due to the advanced decomposition, there were no usable organs left, and there were no fractures, not even the hyoid bone, which is typically broken in manual strangulation. But even without a clear cause of death, it was obvious that Richard Satchwell's story didn't add up. The robe belt, the freezer, the staged renovations, the lies, and the motive, that may have been the only part where he told the truth. Richard Satchwell admitted to Gardai that Tina had told him she wanted to leave. After 28 years together, she told him she had wasted her life. On the night of March 19th, as she lay crying in his arms, she said that she was done. And officers believe that was it. That was the trigger. They think that Richard Satchwell, deeply obsessed and completely dependent on her, snapped, that he couldn't handle the idea of her walking away. That was the motive Gardai put forward. Control, possession, the idea that if Tina couldn't stay with him, she wouldn't be with anyone else, ever. And perhaps the most chilling detail of all, after burying her under the stairs, he told Gardai that he did it so she'd never be alone, so she'd always be with him. Not love, obsession, and ultimately, murder. As the trial continued, the court finally heard from the people who had been living with Tina's absence over 7 long years, her family. And what they had to say, it painted an even darker picture of the life that Tina had been living behind closed doors. Gardai had already uncovered a troubling pattern of behavior by Richard Satchwell, one that suggested that This wasn't a case of a sudden argument turned deadly, but something that had been building for years. Their investigation revealed that Richard had slowly, deliberately pulled Tina away from the life that she knew. In 2016, he moved her out of Fermoy, where she had close ties, lifelong friends, and her family, to Youghal, a seaside town where she knew no one. According to Gardaí, it seemed like a calculated move. He isolated her, removed her from her support system, and kept her in a place where she'd be easier to control. Even Richard himself eventually admitted to it. In one of his final interviews, he confessed that Tina was unhappy in Youghal, that she missed her life back in Fermoy, that the move had made her upset. But maybe that was the point. Tina's sister Lorraine Howard took the stand and spoke about how her once vibrant social sister seemed to fade over the years. Her words were powerful and heartbreaking. She told the jury that Tina's world, it had become smaller and smaller year after year. Her social circle dwindled. Her visits home became less frequent. It was like Richard had slowly closed the door on the rest of Tina's life, one person at a time, until it was just him. To her family, the signs were there, but they didn't know what to do. And now they were left with what ifs. What if they'd said something, done something, could have stopped what had happened? Tina's family had to sit there and listen as the man who had promised to love and protect her explained in cold and twisted detail how he'd buried her beneath their stairs, and yet still tried to claim it had all been a tragic accident perpetrated by her, the victim. After years of heartbreak, unanswered questions, and quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, Tina Satchwell might still be alive somewhere, her family finally got the closure that they had been waiting for. On May 30th, 2025, yep, literally, days ago, the jury returned with their verdict. It had taken them over 9 hours across 4 long days of deliberations. But when they finally filed back into the courtroom and the words were read aloud, there was no hesitation. Richard Satchwell was unanimously found guilty of the murder of his wife, Tina. In the courtroom, Tina's loved ones wept. You could feel the weight of that moment, not just the end of the trial, but the end of a nightmare that had dragged on for more than 7 years. Outside the court, her family stood together and spoke to the waiting media. Their message was simple but powerful. They said, quote, "We finally have justice. Justice for Tina, the lovely girl as they called her, who had been so full of life, so loved, and so missed." They didn't want her name to be remembered only in connection to Richard or to the horrific details that had come out during the trial. They wanted people to remember Tina, who she was, not what had happened to her. After Tina's remains were returned to her family in 2023, they made a heartbreaking but beautiful decision. They buried her in 2 separate graves, so she could rest in peace with the people she had loved the most. Half of her ashes were placed with her beloved grandmother, Florence. The other half were laid to rest next to her brother, Tom. It was a way of bringing her home. And maybe, in some small way, it gave her the peace that had been denied to her for so long. That's it for me tonight. If you'd like to reach out, you can find me on Facebook at Serial Napper. You can find my audio on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. I post all of my episodes in video format over on YouTube, so go check it out. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'd love if you can give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm also on Patreon. If you'd like to get your Serial Napper episodes early and ad-free, hop on over and check out all the details at patreon.com/serialnapper. Until next time, sweet dreams, stay kind, especially in the comments. Bye.